The United Nations Hall buzzed with tension. World leaders filled the massive room, translators whispered through earpieces, and cameras broadcasted the event live to millions. Then, Donald Trump raised his hand. Slowly, deliberately. "Security," he said sharply, not bothering to look at the man he was referring to. "Remove that soldier." He meant Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Gasps echoed. The room froze. The camera panned to Traoré, sitting upright in his crisp brown uniform. His eyes locked on Trump's, not with fear, not with anger, but something stronger. Stillness. Two large security guards began walking down the aisle. One clutched his earpiece, the other tightened his black gloves. Someone in the Nigerian delegation dropped a pen. In the corner, a journalist's hand trembled as she zoomed in her lens. "Why now?" whispered a delegate. "He challenged him," another muttered. "He said the quiet part out loud." But Traoré didn't move. He didn't flinch. He simply stood. And then, he smiled. The guards were now just steps away. What nobody expected was what he would do next. The UN Secretary General rose to speak, but no words came out. The silence in the hall was electric. The cameras caught every breath, every glance, every flicker of panic. Ibrahim Traoré turned to the guards and gently lifted his hand, not to resist, but to greet them. "Gentlemen," he said softly, "I came here to speak. If I must leave, I will, but not without leaving the truth behind." The guards paused. They weren't sure what to do. Trump narrowed his eyes. "This isn't Burkina Faso," he scoffed across the hall, his voice amplified. "We don't tolerate rebellious soldiers in real diplomacy." Some delegates chuckled nervously. Others frowned. But Traoré didn't look at Trump. He looked at the cameras. The world. "I speak not for rebellion," he said, "but for the children who dig your minerals, for the mothers who bury their sons because of foreign greed, for the Africa that doesn't get invited to write history, only to suffer from it." A murmur rolled across the room like thunder. The guards lowered their hands. Trump stood up. "You're done here." But as he said it, a small voice came from behind. A journalist whispered, "Wait." He brought a document. Captain Ibrahim Traoré slowly reached into his jacket. Security tensed. Delegates braced. A few journalists ducked under their desks, fearing the worst. But what he pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was a sealed brown envelope. He handed it, without a word, to the nearest UN security officer. "Give this to the chair," he said. "You'll want to read what's inside before I'm removed." The guard hesitated, then took the envelope and delivered it to the Secretary General. The envelope was thick, official, and bore 3 distinct seals: Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger. Inside, classified documents, satellite photos, secret contracts, and one shocking statement, signed by 3 African leaders. The Secretary General's face changed. He leaned forward, his lips parted. Then he looked directly at Donald Trump. This is serious," he said, voice barely a whisper. Trump frowned. "What is it?" The Secretary General didn't answer. Instead, he hit the button for emergency closed session. Security immediately sealed the doors. Journalists were escorted out. The live broadcast was cut. The world didn't see what happened next. But inside, every leader leaned in. Ibrahim Traoré had just flipped the entire meeting upside down, with one envelope, and it was only the beginning. Behind the closed UN doors, the room turned heavy. The Secretary General slowly flipped the pages from Traoré's envelope. His hands trembled slightly. Page 1 showed satellite photos, underground mining activity in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Not by African companies, but by foreign-owned private contractors, unmarked, undocumented. Page 2 was worse, a leaked memo, signed by a Western diplomat, requesting clearance to temporarily detain and silence local actors resisting development plans. The room fell silent. Trump leaned forward. "This is fake. It's propaganda." But nobody laughed. One African delegate whispered, "We've seen the same trucks in our forests." Traore finally spoke. "These documents came at a cost. 2 journalists died leaking them. A soldier vanished delivering them across the Sahel. And I was told to burn them before this meeting." He paused. "But I didn't come here to stay silent." His voice cracked. "I came here to defend the dignity of Africa." A single tear slid down a woman's cheek in the Kenyan delegation. The moment hung like thunderclouds. Trump stood abruptly. "You don't belong in this room." But now, it wasn't just Traore they were looking at. It was the truth. Traore slowly stepped to the center of the room. No mic, no papers, just his voice. "When I was 10, he began, "I watched foreign engineers come to my village. They shook hands with our elders, promised roads, schools, clean water." He paused. "But within months they were gone, and they left behind poisoned rivers, broken hills, and machines we couldn't fix." A few delegates lowered their heads. "I remember my mother washing our clothes in that river. Weeks later, she was gone." He looked down for a moment. His voice softened. "She coughed until her body couldn't take it anymore." Silence. Those men never came back. No one was held responsible. He turned to the screen now, showing images from the folder, real photos of suffering, of land stripped bare, of children coughing beside rusting pipelines. "I never wanted to tell this story, but too many Africans have died in silence. Today, in front of the world, I will not." There wasn't a dry eye in the hall. Even a European delegate wiped his face and whispered to a colleague, "We never saw this side of him." But Traore wasn't done. He had one more thing to show. "Chair," Traore said gently, "with your permission, I ask for 60 seconds to play a video." The Secretary General nodded slowly. A staffer inserted a flash drive. The room darkened. The screen lit up. It was grainy footage, shot at night, in a village. A child, barefoot, maybe 6 years old, was walking along a dusty road carrying a jerry can. A shaky voice behind the camera whispered, "This is Kudugu. They've been promised water for 3 years. The trucks never came, but foreign companies drive past daily." Suddenly a loud rumble echoed. A massive black truck, marked with no logo, sped by. The wind from it nearly knocked the child off balance. The video cut. Back in the UN hall, several delegates covered their mouths. "That was taken last week," Traore said quietly. "That child's name is Karim. He represents millions." Trump tried to speak, but the mic was already cut off. "No," said the Secretary General. "For once, let the African voice finish speaking." The entire room, including Trump, sat in total silence. Traore looked around, and with quiet force he asked, "If we can't speak here, then where?" As the final frame of the video faded, the UN conference room remained frozen. The silence was louder than any speech. Then something unexpected happened. A delegate from Ghana stood. "Mr. Chairman," she said, "for the record, I've seen that child. I visited that village in 2023. This isn't just real, it's worse." Others began nodding. The German delegate raised her hand. "We funded one of those mining companies, but we were told the locals agreed." Ibrahim looked at her gently. "Agreed with what choice? No school or poisoned land?" The Mexican ambassador looked down. "We trusted the reports. We never heard the truth." Trump's face tightened. His voice cut through. "This is all a setup. He's trying to embarrass the West." But now even the Secretary General looked away from Trump. And then the South African delegate stood slowly and clapped. Alone. 1 clap, 2, then Kenya, then Brazil, then Malaysia. Traoré remained still, his eyes glassy but unbroken. They weren't just clapping for what he said. They were clapping for what he dared to say in front of the world. And Trump, who had tried to silence him, was slowly being silenced by truth. Traoré reached into his pocket again. This time it wasn't a folder or video. It was a handwritten letter. "I wasn't going to share this," he said. "But after that applause, I think the world deserves to know." He unfolded the creased paper. It was written by a young soldier named Idrissa. He served with us during an operation to stop illegal gold extraction in our northern region. He didn't survive. His voice cracked. Then he read aloud, "If I die, let the world know I wasn't fighting for power. I was fighting so my little sister doesn't have to drink muddy water or dig with her hands for scraps. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. But I hope my president did." The room was silent again. Traoré looked up, tears filling his eyes. "He wrote this to me 3 days before he was ambushed. He was 19. A few diplomats openly sobbed. This wasn't about politics anymore. It was about truth, suffering, humanity. Even the CNN crew outside, still rolling in silence, couldn't stop the tears streaming from the anchor's eyes. Traoré folded the letter slowly, and then he looked right at Trump. Traoré's voice was barely above a whisper. "Mr. Trump," he said, "what would you do if Idrissa was your son?" The question didn't come with anger. It came with something heavier, grief. Trump blinked. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. A moment passed, then another. The question lingered in the air, like smoke that refused to clear. Across the room, the expressions had changed. The posturing was gone. The politics faded. Now, it was just humans, listening to another human speak about a life lost. "I'm not here to win arguments," Traoré continued. "I'm here to stop this from being normal." He turned slowly to the room. "How many more Idrissas must die before someone listens?" The Rwandan ambassador stood quietly. "Too many already have." And for the first time in hours, Trump leaned back in his chair and stayed silent. Outside, the video clip of Traoré's question had already been leaked. Within minutes, it hit 10 million views. By midnight, the hashtag "If Idrissa was your son" was trending in 78 countries. The world wasn't just watching anymore. It was listening. The emergency session had ended. The doors reopened. As the delegates filed back in, the live global broadcast resumed. But this wasn't the same room anymore. Something had changed. The once dismissive tone of many diplomats had softened. Some wore red eyes, some held tissues. One or two hadn't said a word in 20 minutes. Trump sat still, arms crossed, jaw tight. But even his closest aides noticed. He hadn't said a word since the Idrissa letter. Meanwhile, Traoré quietly returned to his seat. No smugness, no gloating, just dignity. Suddenly, a BBC journalist asked aloud, her mic still on, "Mr. Traoré, if you had been removed like Trump ordered, none of this truth would have come out. What gave you the courage to stay?" He paused, then simply said, "I didn't stay for myself. I stayed for the ones who have no microphone, for the graves with no names." Her eyes filled with tears. Twitter exploded. "Graves with no names" was now trending alongside "If Idrissa was your son." Millions weren't just watching anymore. They were feeling and crying. And for the first time in years, the United Nations didn't feel so distant. After Traoré sat down, the camera caught a subtle moment. The French ambassador leaned across the table and whispered something to the American delegation. No one heard it clearly, but one microphone caught the end of it. "We should have listened earlier." Suddenly, the U.S. ambassador requested the floor, and the room grew tense again. She stood, looked at Trump for a brief second, and said, The United States will review its contracts and presence in Sahel mining operations. Gasps. Even Traoré's eyes lifted slightly. Trump stood up, red-faced, but the ambassador continued. What I heard in this room, what I saw, it cannot be unseen. The hall remained silent. Then, the Nigerian ambassador added, Burkina Faso has just opened a door we were afraid to knock on. And then came the softest, most unexpected sound, applause. Not for drama, not for politics, but for truth. Traoré didn't speak again. He didn't need to. The world had already begun speaking for him, and somewhere, in a dusty Sahel village, little Karim's video had been seen by over 40 million people. One clip, one envelope, one letter. And now, a new possibility. That night, as Traoré returned to his hotel, one of his aides handed him a letter. It was handwritten, folded neatly, no envelope. It simply read, My name is Fatou. I am Karim's sister. When my brother's video came out, I cried. But not because I was sad. I cried because finally, someone listened. They all thought we were just poor kids. But today, you made him matter. You made my brother famous. You made him important. Please don't stop. Please don't give up on us. The whole village is watching you. Traoré folded the letter carefully. Then he sat on the edge of the bed, stared at the floor, and wept. Not as a leader, not as a soldier, but as a man who carried millions of unheard voices on his back. He didn't respond to the media that night. He didn't speak to the press. Because some moments don't need noise. They need silence and remembering. And in that moment, the world wasn't just watching a political debate. They were witnessing a movement being born. It was just after midnight in New York when Traoré's satellite phone buzzed. He answered immediately. Captain, came the voice of his aide back in Ouagadougou. You need to hear this. The call was patched to a local radio broadcast back in Burkina Faso. Traoré listened in silence. A young girl was speaking live on air. My name is Fatou. I'm 10. My brother Karim was the boy in the video. I want to say thank you to the man who showed the world how we live. Traoré held the phone closer. I thought we were invisible, she continued. But now, my village is proud. Even my father cried, and he never cries. In the background, villagers could be heard cheering and clapping around a small radio. Traoré's eyes filled with tears. He covered his mouth with one hand. This was the reason he stayed in that UN hall. Not for speeches, not for applause, but for a forgotten village and a little girl who believed no one cared. He whispered, Thank you, Fatou. The phone slipped from his hand. That night, the strongest man in the room let himself break, quietly, alone. The next morning, the UN reconvened. But this time, something unusual had been placed in the center of the room. An empty wooden chair. No sign, no plaque. Just a single child-sized chair, painted with the flag of Burkina Faso. The Secretary General tapped his mic. We were all deeply moved by yesterday's events. But today, this chair represents every child who is not in this room, who never got to speak, who may not survive until next year's meeting. No one said a word, but Ibrahim Traoré stood. Slowly. He walked over to the chair, bent down, and placed something on the seat. Idris's letter. I will never sit in this room again, he said, unless that chair is also here. The entire room stood. Every delegate, every staff member, even a few guards. They clapped, not out of politics, not out of performance, but from the kind of respect you give to someone who didn't come for power, but came for the voiceless. That moment would become one of the most replayed clips in UN history. And across Africa, children saw it and whispered, He didn't forget us. As Traoré stepped back to his seat, Donald Trump suddenly stood, his expression unreadable. He glanced once at the wooden chair, then looked around the room where nearly every delegate now had a solemn face, and none were looking at him. "This whole thing has turned into a circus," he muttered. Then louder, "I'm done here." He turned and walked out. Cameras followed him down the long marble hallway, his footsteps echoing. Not a single delegate followed, not even one. Reporters swarmed him for a comment. He said nothing. Back inside, Traore remained quiet, his hands folded. The Secretary General cleared his throat. "There will be no further interruptions. The meeting will proceed." And it did, without one of the most powerful men in the world. That image, Trump leaving, the chair remaining, circulated the globe within minutes. And for the first time in years, headlines across every continent shared one name in common: Captain Ibrahim Traoré. But more than that, they shared his message. The morning after the UN meeting, Ibrahim Traoré sat alone in his hotel room. His phone buzzed every minute. News agencies, presidents, youth groups from Kenya to Brazil, even celebrities had posted. Traoré reminded us what leadership truly is. He spoke for the unseen. But it wasn't those messages that moved him. It was a video sent by Fatou. In it, she stood in the same dusty path where Karim had walked. This time she wasn't crying, she was smiling. Behind her stood villagers, holding up handmade signs that read, "Thank you, Ibrahim. You made Karim a hero. Now the world sees us." Fatou's voice trembled in the clip. "They used to forget us. Now, they want to help us." Traoré's hand covered his mouth. He turned off the video and wept again, not because he was sad, but because, for once, Africa had been heard, without begging. And this time, it wasn't charity they were asking for. It was respect. 1 week later, Captain Ibrahim Traoré returned to Burkina Faso. But this wasn't a normal arrival. The Ouagadougou airport was overflowing, thousands of people waiting, women with drums, children with flags, old men with tears in their eyes. As his plane landed, the crowd erupted. It wasn't just a welcome. It was a celebration of dignity. Traoré stepped off the plane slowly, visibly overwhelmed. He wasn't wearing his full uniform, just a simple shirt and the Burkina Faso flag around his shoulders. Fatou ran to him first. She clutched a small bouquet of dry wildflowers. He knelt, hugged her. "I kept my promise," he whispered. She nodded, eyes glistening. "And I will keep mine. I'll become a leader too." The cameras captured it all. That hug, that tear, that promise. It played across African media for weeks, but it wasn't a political story anymore. It was personal, because the world had seen Traoré stand tall at the UN. But now they were seeing something even greater, a leader kneeling for his people. Back in his office, Traoré sat before a plain camera. No suit, no staging, just one final message. To the world, thank you for listening. To those who cried, to those who asked questions, to those who finally saw our struggle, thank you. But I don't want pity. I want justice for children like Idrissa. I want clean water for Karim. I want freedom, not in speeches, but in the soil, in the air, in the hearts of every African child. If my voice shook something in you, let it push you to act, because I am not the story. They are. He paused, looked into the lens, and said finally, "And to Karim, you changed the world without saying a word." The video ended with a still image of the wooden chair in the UN hall, still there, still waiting. If this story touched your heart, if you felt the tears, the pain, the power, don't just scroll. Click like to show you stand for the truth. Comment below, "I see you, Karim," if you believe in a new future for Africa. And most importantly, subscribe, so more people hear these stories that matter. Let's make sure the world never forgets what happened at that UN meeting. Ever.